The blizzard came in like something that meant to stay. By nightfall, the world outside Nina's window had stopped being a neighborhood and become something formless, a white erasure stretching in every direction, swallowing roads and fences and the comfortable geometry of ordinary life. Nearly 3 feet of snow. The wind pressed against the glass with a sound like breathing. She didn't mind. She was inside. She had blankets and television and the warm indifference of a house that knew its owner well. She fell asleep on the couch without deciding to. That's the kind of sleep that feels safest, the kind that finds you. She woke up suddenly, the way you do when something has called your name in a language you don't consciously speak. For a moment, she wasn't sure where the sound ended and the dream began. A knock. Or the idea of one. She sat up in the dark, tilting her head like an animal catching a frequency. The house was quiet. The wind outside was not. Nothing, she told herself. She shut off the television. She was halfway to the stairs when the feeling caught her, that particular instinct that lives somewhere older than thought. She turned back to the front door. The peephole showed her nothing. Just ice and darkness pressed against the glass like a hand covering an eye. She opened the door. No one stood there. But someone had been there. The snow told the story in the only way snow can, not with footprints but with the evidence of effort. 2 long furrows cut through the deep white, a path of dragged legs leading straight up to her porch and, presumably, away again. She stared into the blizzard. Past 5 feet, the world ceased to exist. Whatever, whoever, had made that path was now swallowed by the white. She told herself, lost. Someone lost in the storm, going door to door. It was the most reasonable thing she could think of, and she held it like a candle in a very large room. She locked the door and went to bed. The cold woke her the second time. Not gradually, not the slow creep of a failing furnace. She surfaced from sleep already shivering, her breath unfurling in pale clouds above her face. The room was dark. The windows were closed. And yet the temperature inside her home had somehow descended to something close to the temperature of the world outside, as though the house had quietly given up its warmth while she slept. 20 degrees, she would estimate later. Painful cold. She checked her phone. 2 hours had passed. She moved downstairs carefully, half expecting the horror movie version of this, the front door thrown open, snow tracked across the floors, the whole grammar of a violation on display. But the door was closed. The locks were intact. The house looked exactly as she'd left it. She found the thermostat in the front hallway. The dial had been turned to off. She stood there a long moment, trying to locate a version of events in which she had done this herself. She couldn't find one. The screen wouldn't even illuminate. It sat dead and dark in the hallway like something that had been silenced. If this is an intruder, she thought, where are they? And why the thermostat? That question, why the thermostat, is perhaps the most disturbing thread in this story, the one that unravels everything else. Because an intruder who steals makes a kind of terrible sense. But an intruder who manipulates the environment, who turns off your heat on a below-zero night and then waits, that is not desperation. That is design. She decided to go back upstairs for her phone. She had just reached the bottom of the staircase when she heard it. The couch. She knew that sound the way you know the sounds your home makes, intimately, specifically, in the way that makes its wrongness immediately and completely clear. The couch made that sound when weight shifted upon it. She turned. She took 2 steps toward the living room doorway and leaned around the corner. He was sitting on the couch. Upright. Facing forward. His head slowly turned toward her as she appeared, not startled, not surprised, as if he had simply been waiting for this moment and was pleased it had finally arrived. The room was dark. But she could see his eyes. Wide. Still. The eyes of something that had stopped performing the ordinary business of being human. And he was smiling. Not extravagantly. Not the theatrical grimace of movie monsters. Just slightly. Just enough. A smile that said, I know something you don't. I've known it this whole time. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He only watched her with that expression of patient, private amusement, as though they were sharing a joke she hadn't quite heard yet. She ran. She locked herself in the bedroom. She called the police. Her voice was barely a voice. 30 seconds later, she heard him on the stairs. The footsteps were unhurried. Deliberate. The sound of someone who had nowhere to be and all the time in the world to get there. She watched the shadow move beneath the gap in the door. He stopped outside it. 3 knocks. Slow. Evenly spaced. Knock. 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 Then silence. Then footsteps retreating down the hall. She waited nearly 20 minutes for the police to arrive, crouched and freezing in the dark. By the time they came, he was gone. No tracks in the snow. No trace beyond the one he'd already left, that dragged path to her front door, which the police believed he'd entered through after picking the lock. Picking the lock, Nina would think afterward. He didn't look like someone who could do that. But then, what does such a person look like? What does someone look like who walks through a blizzard to a stranger's home, lets himself in, turns off the heat and sits in the dark waiting to be found? He wasn't there by accident. He wasn't there for her television, or her jewelry, or her cash. He was there for whatever passed between them in that dark living room, that horrible, silent exchange. The joke whose punchline only he understood. Some nights, Nina still wakes suddenly, certain she heard something. She always checks the peephole now. And she always uses the deadbolt.